Martha Doyle slammed the cast-iron skillet down so hard the flame jumped not out of rage, but because her hands had stopped feeling the weight of it years ago. Flour on her apron, blood under one nail where the bread tin had caught her, and not a single man in that crowded, smoke-filled room even flinched. That was the morning everything was still ordinary. By sundown, one man's question would crack her life straight down the middle, and she would never again answer to silence. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with us all the way to the end. You will not want to miss what happens next. The biscuits went into the oven at 4:30 in the morning. Martha Doyle knew the exact moment they were ready. Not by the clock, because the clock above the kitchen door hadn't worked in 3 years, and Mr. Gable had never once mentioned fixing it, but by smell. There was a window of maybe 2 minutes between perfect and overdone, and in 9 years of working the kitchen at Gable's Way Station, she had never missed it. Not once. Not in blizzard, not in fever, not in grief. She pulled the tray out bare-handed because her oven mitts had burned through at the thumbs 2 months ago, and she hadn't yet worked up the will to ask for new ones. She set the tray on the iron rack, straightened her back, and pressed both palms flat against the counter to steady herself. Her lower back had been speaking to her all morning in a language she could only describe as furious. Outside, she could already hear the wagons. The morning rush at Gable's was not a gentle thing. It was men, rough men, trail men, men who smelled like horse and distance pushing through the front door with their hats still on, dropping coins on the table before they'd even sat down, calling out orders the way you'd call out commands to a dog. Stew, coffee, biscuits, more biscuits. That was the menu. That was always the menu. Martha hadn't been asked her opinion of it in 9 years, and she had stopped having opinions about it somewhere around year 4. She loaded the biscuits onto the serving tray, picked it up, and carried it out herself, because the girl who usually helped in the mornings, young Polly 16 and skittish as a colt, hadn't come in. Again. Martha had noticed, but said nothing. Polly had a mother who drank and a little brother who needed minding. Martha understood the arithmetic of that kind of poverty better than most. The front room was already half full and getting louder by the minute. She set the tray in the middle of the serving counter, turned to go back for the coffee pot, and was immediately stopped by a hand on her arm. Not rough, just sudden. It was Hector the busboy, a boy of about 14 who was perpetually on the edge of being fired for one infraction or another. "Mr. Gable wants the back tables served first today," he said. "He's got a buyer coming in." "A buyer for what?" Martha said. Hector shrugged. "I don't ask." She didn't either. She picked up the tray again and moved to the back of the room, threading through chairs and elbows and the general chaos of hungry men who did not move for anyone, not even a woman carrying a tray that could brain 3 of them if she swung it right. The back tables were occupied by a group of drovers, 4 men trail-burned and quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. They didn't look up when she set down the biscuits. They didn't say, "Thank you." One of them reached across the tray before she'd even finished setting it down and grabbed 2 biscuits with one hand, and that was more or less the extent of the interaction. Martha went back for the coffee. The room filled. More men came in. The noise rose to its usual pitch somewhere between a cattle pen and a saloon, and Martha moved through it the way water moves through rocks, finding the path of least resistance, never stopping long enough to be noticed, never slowing long enough to be spoken to. This was a skill she had developed over years. She called it survival. On the rare occasions when she allowed herself a private thought, she sometimes called it something less charitable. She was refilling a coffee cup at the far end of the counter when the door opened again. She didn't look up. She had stopped looking up at doors years ago. Looking up meant hoping, and hope in this room had a way of souring fast. She heard the boots, a heavy, deliberate tread. Not the shuffled stomp of a man rushing in out of the cold, but the measured step of someone who was used to covering ground and wasn't in any hurry about it. She heard the chair scrape a single chair pulled out alone at a table near the window. She heard the hat come off, set down on the table with a soft thud. She still didn't look up. Hector appeared at her elbow. Table near the front window. Says he wants whatever's hot. Everything's hot, Martha said. That's what I told him. She lifted the tray, with the last of the first biscuit batch 4 remaining, and carried it over. She set the tray down, set a bowl of stew beside it, placed a spoon across the top, and was already turning away when the man at the table said, "Ma'am?" She stopped, not because she was surprised to be spoken to, though she was a little, but because of the way he said it. Not as a summons, more like a door being held open. She turned back. He was looking at her. Not at the food, not past her at someone else, not at some point over her shoulder, the way men usually looked when they were technically talking to her. He was looking directly at her with a pair of eyes that were the color of creek water in late summer, somewhere between gray and green, and deeply, quietly attentive. He was not a young man. Somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed, with the kind of face that had been shaped by weather rather than age. There were lines at the corners of his eyes and a jaw that carried 2 days of dark stubble that was going silver at the chin. He was broad through the shoulders and long in the arms, and his hands on the table were the hands of a man who had worked with them every day of his life. He wore no gun on his hip that she could see. That was unusual. "Yes," she said. "I just wanted to say," he said, and then he stopped. He looked down at the biscuit in his hand. He'd already picked one up without her noticing, and then back up at her. "I want to know who made these." Martha waited. She had learned to wait through the pause before a complaint. The pause before a criticism was always a little longer than the pause before anything else. She'd cataloged them over the years the way a naturalist might catalog birdsong. You could tell everything from the shape of the silence. But this man's silence had a different shape. He wasn't working himself up to anything. He was just waiting for her answer. "I did," she said. And then he said, "These are the finest biscuits I have eaten in 10 years. The noise in the room did not stop, all at once. Noise rarely does, but it seemed to in her memory of that morning. It seemed to press back like water against a dam, and for a moment there was only the window light, and this man's steady eyes, and the strange ringing in her ears that she would later recognize as something she hadn't felt in so long. She'd forgotten it had a name. She was being seen. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. "I'll bring more coffee." She was back in the kitchen before she let herself breathe. She stood at the counter with both hands flat on the wood. The same posture she used when her back hurt, but this time her back was fine, and stared at the wall. There was a crack in the plaster above the shelf where the lard was kept. She had stared at that crack 10,000 times. It had not gotten bigger or smaller in 9 years. Martha Hector appeared in the doorway. "He's asking if there are more biscuits." "There are always more biscuits," she said, and picked up the next tray. His name was Eli Marsh. She learned this, not because he introduced himself, he didn't, not that first morning, but because she overheard him talking to Hector, who was constitutionally incapable of sitting in silence with a stranger for longer than 30 seconds. By the time Martha had refilled his coffee twice, she knew his name, that he was the new foreman out at the Circle K ranch, that he had come up from Texas by way of Kansas, and that he had been on the trail for most of the last 2 years. She learned nothing else that morning because she did not allow herself to ask. She cleaned up after the rush, scrubbed the tray, put the leftover stew back in the pot, swept flour off the floor. Standard. Ordinary. By midday, the room was quiet, and she was alone in the kitchen with the fire and the familiar smell of wood smoke and rendered fat and the ghost scent of the morning's biscuits. She thought about what he'd said exactly once more, and then she put it away. She was good at putting things away. The next morning he came back. She knew it was him before she saw him. Those boots that tread that quality of deliberate quiet in a room full of noise. She did not look up. She was moving a pot of oatmeal off the fire, and she kept her eyes on the pot. She heard him take the same chair by the window. Hector came to her. "The man from yesterday." "I see that." He asked if there were biscuits today. "There are always biscuits," she said again, and tried to make it sound as ordinary as she could, which was harder than usual. She brought him his breakfast herself. She set it down, said nothing. He looked up at her. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said, and went back to the kitchen. This was the conversation. For 3 days running, this was the entire conversation, one word each direction across a distance of maybe 2 feet. And then she was gone before anything else could happen. On the 4th morning he said, "How early do you start?" She had been turning away. She stopped. 4:30, she said. "Every day. Every day the kitchen's open." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's before the sun." "Yes," she said. "It is." She went back to the kitchen. She thought about that exchange for the rest of the day, which irritated her. It was not a meaningful exchange. It was simple arithmetic. Start time, sunrise, 2 facts, nothing more. She had no business thinking about it at all. She had biscuits to prep for tomorrow's stock, to inventory a stovepipe that was developing a worrying rattle that she needed to report to Mr. Gable and would probably be told to ignore. She was very good at ignoring things generally. On the 5th morning he said, "My name is Eli Marsh." He said it without preamble, without occasion, the way you'd state something that simply needed to be stated. He was looking at the window when he said it, not at her, which somehow made it easier. "I know," she said. He looked at her then. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but something in that family. "You asked Hector," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I overheard," she said. "There's a difference." "There is," he agreed. "What's your name, ma'am?" She set the tray down. "Martha Doyle." "Martha," he said, like he was setting the word down somewhere careful. "That's a good name." She had been called many things in this kitchen. Invisible was the most common, though no one ever said it out loud. She had been called slow, though she was faster than any 2 cooks in the county. She had been called lucky by Mr. Gable, meaning she was lucky he'd kept her on when he could have found someone cheaper. She had not in recent memory been told her name was good. "Thank you," she said. She picked up the empty tray and walked back to the kitchen. She stood at the crack in the plaster again. She was not a woman given to illusions. She was 25 years old and had been in this kitchen since she was 16, which meant she had been here long enough to know exactly what this place was and exactly what she was to it. She was labor. She was reliable. She was invisible in the way that important things are often invisible, the foundation of a house, the root of a tree, noticed only when something goes wrong. Eli Marsh coming in every morning and asking her name and complimenting her biscuits did not change any of that. She knew this. She scrubbed the pot with more force than it required. The next week passed like that, him coming in saying small things, her answering them and retreating. She was aware of him, the way you're aware of a lit lantern in a room you keep telling yourself is dark. She did not examine this awareness too closely. She was a practical woman. Practical women did not spend working hours thinking about the color of a man's eyes. She thought about the biscuits instead. She thought about how the cold had been settling into the flour differently lately, making the dough stiffer, requiring more working. She thought about the sourdough starter on the shelf above the window, her mother's starter 20 years old. If it was a day, the one thing Martha had carried with her from home to this town, from that first rooming house to the one room back of this kitchen where she slept. She thought about how it needed feeding this evening and how she was going to be too tired to do it properly, and how that was a thing she absolutely could not let happen, because it was the last living piece of her mother, and she would work through bone break before she let it die. These were the things a practical woman thought about. It was a Tuesday when she first learned what kind of man Eli Marsh actually was. She was in the kitchen when she heard the voices from out front, louder than the usual breakfast clatter, sharper edged. She recognized Mr. Gable's voice, which had a particular quality when he was angry, a high thin sound like a wire pulled too tight. She did not recognize the other voice at first, but she recognized the tone. Calm. Flat. The kind of calm that does not move regardless of what's thrown at it. She wiped her hands and went to the doorway. Mr. Gable was standing in the middle of the room, a lean, slope-shouldered man in his 50s with a gray mustache and the permanent squint of someone who had been suspicious of everything for so long his face had set that way. He was pointing at a table where two drovers were sitting, and he was telling them at increasing volume that he had told them to move twice, and he was not going to tell them a third time, because this table was reserved. The drovers were not moving. They were the kind of men who made not moving into a statement. Eli was sitting at his usual window table, watching. He had a coffee cup in his hand, and he was watching the whole thing with the expression of someone doing a quiet calculation. Mr. Gable's voice climbed another register. One of the drovers pushed his chair back from the table, not to stand, just to make a point about the space he was willing to take up. Eli set his coffee cup down. He stood up from his chair, not fast, not dramatically, just stood up and walked over to the table. He didn't raise his voice. He said something to the two drovers that Martha couldn't fully hear, though she caught the words, "Move along," and "much obliged." His hand rested briefly on the back of one of the chairs. 30 seconds later, the drovers moved. Eli went back to his table, picked up his coffee, and took a sip. Mr. Gable stared at him. Then he turned and walked back behind the counter. He passed the kitchen doorway without looking at Martha, which was the most normal thing that had happened all morning. She went back to her stove, but she stood there thinking about those 30 seconds for a long time. That was the thing about Eli Marsh that she couldn't put away as neatly as everything else. He didn't make noise about what he was. He didn't strut or announce himself. He just did the thing and then went back to his coffee, as if being the kind of man who quietly rearranged difficult situations was simply the cost of being alive, and he paid it without looking for credit. She had known very few people like that. Her mother had been one. She fed the sourdough starter that night late, almost midnight, after she'd cleaned the kitchen and swept the floor and checked the fire, and she stood in the dark holding the little crock that had her mother's fingerprints worn into the clay from 30 years of handling, and she tried not to feel anything in particular. She was not entirely successful. It was 2 days after the drover incident that Mr. Gable appeared in the kitchen doorway with the look on his face that she had learned over 9 years to brace for. "Winter's coming early," he said. "Yes," she said. She was kneading dough and she did not stop. "Business slows down when the weather goes hard." "Yes," she said. "I'm going to need to make some adjustments." She kept kneading. "What kind of adjustments?" "Going to cut your wages by a quarter starting next week." He said it the way you'd say you were going to rearrange the furniture. Practical, slightly inconvenient, not a moral event. She stopped kneading. She pressed her hands flat on the dough and stared at the wall. The crack in the plaster, unchanged. "You'll also need to start taking on the front floor clearing in the evenings," he said. "Polly's not coming in reliably, and I need someone I can count on. More work, less pay." She had been in this kitchen for 9 years, and he was delivering this information the way you'd discuss a change in the weather. Because to him, it was exactly that atmospheric impersonal, simply the way things were. "Yes, Mr. Gable," she said. She heard him go. She heard the door settle back into its frame. She went back to kneading the dough. Her hands moved and she stared at the crack in the plaster and she thought, "This is what you do. You say yes. You say yes, Mr. Gable, and you get up at 4:30 and you go to bed at midnight, and you carry the tray, and you clean the floor, and you tend the starter, and you do not complain, because complaining requires believing you are owed better, and believing you are owed better requires believing you are worth something." And she had spent 9 years in a room full of men who ate her food and never looked at her face, and she was not entirely sure she still knew how to believe that. She kneaded the dough. She did not hear the footstep in the doorway until a voice said, "Martha." She spun. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. Eli Marsh was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was not supposed to be back here. Customers did not come back here. She had never in 9 years had a customer step into her kitchen. Her kitchen. The one room in this building that was in some partial and unclaimed way hers. She stared at him. He looked at her steady, unhurried, and said, "I heard what he told you." The blood came up in her face. Hot, immediate, complicated. Not quite shame and not quite anger, and something older than both of them underneath. "That's not your business," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He didn't move from the doorway. He wasn't blocking her. He wasn't encroaching. He was just there as present and solid as a fence post. "Then why are you standing in my kitchen?" she said. He looked around the room, not invasively, just the way a man looks at a place he wants to understand. His eyes went to the stovepipe, then the shelves, then the little clay crock on the ledge above the window. He looked at it for a moment longer than the other things. "Is that your sourdough?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "The starter. On the shelf." He nodded toward it. "It's got a particular smell to it. Old one." She stared at him. "How do you know what an old starter smells like?" "My grandmother kept one," he said. 30-some years. She used to say the older it got, the more it tasted like the place it came from." He paused. "Where'd yours come from?" Martha looked at the crock. It took her a moment to answer because the question was so unexpected, and because the answer when it came up in her came from somewhere she didn't usually open the door to. "My mother," she said. "She's been gone 8 years." Eli nodded. He didn't say sorry, which she appreciated. People said sorry and then moved on to the next thing, and it always felt less like comfort and more like a door being politely closed. He just nodded, as if the information was worth holding. "What did she teach you?" he said. "About baking?" Martha looked at him. "Why?" "Because those biscuits," he said, "didn't come from a recipe. Nobody bakes like that from a recipe. Somebody taught you something real." She was quiet for a long moment. The fire made its sounds. The dough sat on the board waiting for her. "She taught me," Martha said slowly, "that the bread knows when you're in a hurry. It knows when you don't care. You can't rush it and you can't fake it." She paused. She said cooking is the only honest conversation most people ever have. Eli looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "She was right." And Martha Doyle, who had not cried in longer than she could precisely remember, felt something move in the back of her throat that she absolutely refused to allow any further progress. "You should go back to the front room," she said. "You're not supposed to be in here." "I know," he said. He didn't move for another moment. Then he straightened, touched the brim of the hat he was carrying in his hand, a small, deliberate gesture, the kind that meant something in the language of men who'd been raised to mean what they did, and stepped back through the doorway. She turned back to her dough. Her hands were not entirely steady, and she was furious with herself about it, and she kneaded the dough harder than necessary until they steadied again, and she stood there in her kitchen alone in the middle of the morning with the fire and the smell of bread and the little crock on the shelf, and 9 years of silence pressing against her from every wall. And she thought, he asked about her, not about the biscuits, not about the kitchen, about her mother, about what her mother had taught her. She pressed her palms into the dough. No one had asked her about her mother in 8 years. She stood there for a long time before she could make herself move again. She went to bed that night thinking about the dough. That was what she told herself anyway. She lay on her narrow cot in the back room of the kitchen, a room so small that if she stretched her arms sideways, she could touch both walls, and she stared at the ceiling in the dark, and she thought about the dough and the fire and the inventory she needed to do tomorrow, and the stovepipe rattle that was getting worse, and absolutely nothing else. She was asleep by 11. She was up again by 4. That was the rhythm. That had always been the rhythm. Up before the sun. Flour on her hands before she was fully awake, fire-stoked water on the day already running by the time the first gray light appeared in the small window above the sink. This was her life, and she knew its shape, the way you know the inside of your own pocket by feel in the dark, without looking. She did not think about Eli Marsh standing in her kitchen doorway asking about her mother. She thought about it constantly. By the end of the week, she had cataloged the conversation 17 times in the way that certain sentences have of replaying themselves at inconvenient moments while she was kneading, while she was sweeping in that half-awake space just before sleep where the mind does its most treacherous work. She was not a romantic woman. She had never had the luxury of being a romantic woman. Romantic women had time and safety and people who looked at them, and Martha Doyle had none of those things, and had made her peace with that fact a long time ago. She had made her peace with it so thoroughly that she almost didn't recognize what was happening to her. Almost. He came in on Monday morning, and she brought his coffee before he asked for it. She realized what she'd done approximately 1 second after she set it down, the cup placed at his right hand, the way she'd noticed he preferred without him having to signal for it, and she felt heat climb the back of her neck. He looked at the cup, then up at her. "Thank you," he said. "You come in at the same time every morning," she said. "It's efficiency." "Is that what it is?" he said. It was not quite a question. The corner of his mouth moved in a way she was starting to be able to read, though she wished she wasn't. She went back to the kitchen. Efficiency. She stood at the stove and said the word out loud quietly to no one, and felt like an absolute fool. On Wednesday, he came in with his hat in his hand and a cut across his left palm that had been wrapped in a piece of cloth that was doing a poor job of the task. She saw it when he sat down. The cloth was wool, not linen, and it had soaked through at the heel of his hand. He didn't mention it. He set his hat on the table and looked at the window the way he always did, as if the street outside contained something worth studying. She set down his coffee and said, "That needs proper wrapping." He looked at his hand. "It's fine." "It's not fine, it's soaked through. What did you cut it on?" "Wire fence," he said. "I've had worse." "That's not the argument you think it is." She was already moving. She went to the kitchen, found the small tin box where she kept the few medical supplies she'd accumulated over the years. Not because Mr. Gable had provided them, but because working alone with open flame and sharp implements had taught her to be her own first care, and came back with clean linen and a small jar of the salve she made herself from rendered tallow and dried yarrow. She put them on the table in front of him. He looked at them. He looked at her. "I'll do it," she said. "You'll make a worse job of it with one hand." He was quiet for a moment. Then he held out his hand. She unwound the soaked cloth carefully. The cut was deep, but clean wire did that sliced neat and straight, and it had stopped bleeding, but it needed better protection. She cleaned it, applied the salve, and wrapped it in clean linen without saying anything, and he watched her hands while she worked with an attention that she felt without looking at him. "You've done this before," he said. "Kitchen work is basically a long series of small injuries," she said. "You learn or you bleed continuously." He made a sound that was the closest thing she'd heard from him to a laugh. She tied off the bandage and sat back. He flexed his fingers, slowly testing it. "Good," he said. "Thank you." "Don't get it wet," she said, and went back to her kitchen. She stood at the stove and pressed her clean hand flat against her sternum, where something was doing. Something it had no business doing, and she told it firmly and without equivocation to stop. It didn't. It was a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after he'd first walked through that door, when everything that had been building quietly under the surface broke through. Martha had been up since 4, which was ordinary. What was not ordinary was that Mr. Gable had appeared in the kitchen doorway at 4:15, before the fire was properly up, before the first batch was mixed, wearing his coat. Which meant he had either not been to bed, or had gotten up before she did, which had never once happened in 9 years. "I need the biscuits doubled today," he said. "I'm already working," she said, which was her way of saying yes without giving him the satisfaction of the word. "Buyer's coming back. Wants to see the place at a real morning rush." He paused. "Make it look busy." She looked at him. "It is busy." "Make it look busier." He left. She doubled the biscuits. She also made a second pot of stew, started earlier than usual, and reorganized the serving order so that the tables would fill faster and appear fuller. She did all of this without being asked, and without acknowledgement, because this was also part of the job, reading what was needed and providing it before anyone had to form the words, which was the kind of competence that people in Martha's position were expected to provide and rarely received credit for. The room filled. She worked. The rush was genuinely busy, not performed, because the cold had come down harder overnight, and men on the trail needed warmth, and she provided it, and that was that. She was bringing out the second tray of biscuits when she heard the buyer's voice for the first time. He was a heavy-set man in a city coat, out of place in the room the way a playing card is out of place in a toolbox, and he was standing near the front counter talking to Mr. Gable in the low, satisfied tone of a man who has found what he was looking for. She moved past them, set the tray down, moved back. As she passed the second time, she heard the buyer say, "The cook any good?" And Mr. Gable said, without a pause, without a flicker, "Serviceable, nothing special." She kept walking. She went back into the kitchen. She set down the empty tray on the counter. She put both hands flat on the wood. Nothing special. 9 years. She had been in this kitchen for 9 years. She had learned to read flour by touch and dough by smell and fire by sound. She had cooked for hundreds of men, and not one of them had eaten here, and complained not once, and Mr. Gable had just told a buyer, a man making decisions about the future of this place, about whether it would continue to exist, about what it was worth, that she was nothing special. She heard footsteps. She thought it was Hector. She picked up the next tray. Martha. She turned. Eli was in the doorway again. He had his hat in one hand and his coffee cup in the other, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Not quite anger, because anger makes noise, but something harder and quieter than anger. Something that had been placed with deliberate control. "You heard that," she said. It wasn't a question. "Half the room heard it," he said. "Then half the room knows what I already know," she said, and picked up the tray. "Martha." He stepped into the kitchen. "Set that down for a minute." "I have work to do." "Set it down." Something in his voice, not commanding, not demanding, but absolutely certain, made her set it down. She turned to face him. She kept her expression flat and her chin up, because she had learned a long time ago that the only armor available to a woman in her position was composure, and she wore it now like she had bolted it on. "I'm fine," she said before he could say anything else. "I know you're fine," he said. "You're always fine. That's not what I'm asking about." She stared at him. "What are you asking about?" "I'm asking how long," he said. "How long has he been doing this?" She opened her mouth, closed it. The question was so direct, so simply and plainly aimed, that it bypassed all her armor and went somewhere underneath it, and she felt the place. It landed like a bruise she hadn't known was there. "That's how he runs the place," she said carefully. "That's not an answer." 9 years, she said. "You want an answer? There it is. 9 years. He looked at her. That creek-water gaze, steady and unhurried. She had the sudden irrational thought that this man could outweight a stone. "You do the baking," he said. "Yes." "You do the cooking." "Yes." "You do the floor clearing in the evenings." She hadn't told him that. She felt a small, sharp shift in her chest. "Hector talks," she said. "Hector worries about you," Eli said. "There's a difference." She didn't have an answer for that, so she said nothing. "He cut your wages," Eli said, "and gave you more work." "That's between me and Mr. Gable." "Is it?" "Yes," she said firmly. "It is, and I appreciate your concern, Mr. Marsh, but I have been managing this kitchen and myself for a long time, and I don't need—" "I know you don't need anything," he said. "You've made that very clear. You don't need anything, you don't ask for anything, you don't complain about anything." He paused. "You just keep saying yes, Mr. Gable, and going back to work." The accuracy of it hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She felt her jaw tighten. "You don't know anything about my situation," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't. But I know what I see. Martha, and what I see is a woman who is worth 3 of every person in this building, including the man who signs her wages, and she's being told she's nothing special by a man who couldn't boil water without her." He stopped. His voice had not risen. "That makes me angry. I thought you should know that someone in that room is angry about it, even if you're not allowed to be." The kitchen was very quiet. The fire made its sounds. The wind had picked up outside, and she could hear it working at the corner of the building. Somewhere in the front room, a chair scraped. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm allowed to be angry," she said quietly. "I just can't afford what it costs." He held her gaze. Something in his face shifted, not softening exactly, but settling the way a thing settles when it understands what it's dealing with. "All right," he said. He picked up his coffee cup. He walked back to the doorway, and then he stopped and looked back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "those biscuits are the furthest thing from nothing special that I have encountered in a very long time." He went back to his table. She stood in the kitchen alone and pressed her fingers against her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, and then she picked up the tray and went back to work. 3 days passed. He came in, said his small words, and she answered them, and the rhythm of it had started to feel less like intrusion and more like something she didn't have a word for. Constancy, maybe. The way a fence post is constant. Not warm exactly, just reliably there. On Sunday, which was the one morning. The way station opened late, and Martha didn't have to be in the kitchen until 6. She was in the back room feeding the sourdough starter when she heard raised voices from the front of the building. Not the ordinary raised voices of a busy room, she could read those the way a sailor reads weather, but something sharper. An argument. She came out of the back room, still holding the crock. In the front room, 2 men were standing over Hector. They were not customers. She knew all the regular customers, and she did not know these men. They were large and deliberate, and the kind of clean that meant they'd gotten dressed to make an impression, and one of them had his hand on the front of Hector's shirt, in a way that Hector was clearly not comfortable with. "Where's Gable?" the one with his hand on Hector was saying. He's not in yet," Hector managed. "He doesn't come in Sundays until 8. Then you'll do." The man pulled Hector slightly forward. "You tell Gable that Mr. Dunmore's patience has a bottom to it, and he's getting close." Yes, sir, I'll tell him." "Let him go." Martha said it before she had decided to say it. The words came out steady and clear without any particular drama, which was the only kind of courage she had ever practiced. Both men turned. They looked at her flower apron, and her plain dress, and the clay crock in her hands, and the one holding Hector's shirt, smiled the kind of smile that meant he'd already decided she wasn't someone he needed to take seriously. "This a kitchen matter, sweetheart?" he said. "He's 16 years old," she said. "Let him go." He didn't. "Ma'am." Eli's voice came from the doorway. He had arrived without her hearing. The door she would never quite understand how a man his size moved that quietly, and he was standing just inside the entrance with his hat on, and both hands visible, which she would later understand was a very deliberate choice. The 2 men shifted their attention to him. "This doesn't involve you, friend," the one with Hector said. "The boy's 16, Eli said with exactly the same flatness Martha had used. "And the lady asked you to let him go." Something in the room changed. It was invisible, but Martha felt it, the quality of the air, the way both men recalibrated their reading of the situation. The man released Hector's shirt. Hector stepped sideways immediately, moving toward the kitchen doorway where Martha was standing. She put a hand on his shoulder without looking away from the 2 men. "You tell Gable," the first man said to the room at large, and then they walked out. The door settled. Hector was shaking. Martha could feel it through her hand on his shoulder. "You all right?" she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady. "Go get yourself some water," she said. "Sit down." He went. She and Eli stood in the empty front room looking at each other. "Who is Dunmore?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. "But that's not the first time I've heard that name this week." She absorbed that. "You've been in this town a week." 2 weeks, he said. "I pay attention." "You do," she said. There was no flattery in it. It was simply an observed fact. She had watched him pay attention to the room, to the people in it, to the small details that most men stepped over without seeing. It was a quality she recognized because she practiced it herself out of necessity. "Mr. Gable owes someone money. That'd be my guess," Eli said. "Though it might be something else. Men like that don't usually use a boy for a message, unless the message is meant to scare someone who cares about the boy." She looked at him sharply. "You think they knew Hector works here?" I think they came on a Sunday morning when Gable wouldn't be in, he said. And I think that's not an accident. She stood very still. In 9 years, she had told herself many things about her situation. She had told herself it was stable. She had told herself that stable was enough, that stability was a form of safety, that a woman in her position did not have the luxury of wanting more than stable. She had arranged her life around that logic so thoroughly that she had stopped questioning it. Now she stood in the empty front room of a building that might be entangled in something she hadn't chosen and hadn't been told about, holding a clay crock of her mother's sourdough, and she thought stable. "Martha," Eli was watching her face. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that I have been in this kitchen for 9 years, and in all that time, I have never once been told anything about the business. Not the accounts, not the debts, not the arrangements." She paused. "I cook, I clean, I say yes, and I know nothing." "That's intentional," Eli said. "Yes," she said, "it is." She looked at the crock in her hands. She looked at the front door where the 2 men had gone. She looked at Eli. "I need to feed this," she said, meaning the starter. "And then I need to think." "All right," he said. He sat down at his table by the window. She went back to the kitchen. She did the feeding, the careful measure of flour and water, the slow incorporation, the way the starter thickened and came alive under her hands, and she thought. She thought about 9 years. She thought about her wages being cut. She thought about men named Dunmore. She thought about the fact that she had 1 room, 1 crock, and no information about the place she depended on to survive. She thought about what her mother used to say. A woman who knows nothing about her own situation is not safe. She is only comfortable. She had confused the two. For a very long time, she had confused the two. She went back out front. Eli was still at his table. He had gotten his own coffee from somewhere, which meant he'd gone into the kitchen and found it, which should have bothered her, and for some reason didn't. She sat down across from him. He looked up. "Tell me what you know about Dunmore," she said. He looked at her for a moment, that quiet assessing look, and then he leaned forward and told her. What she learned in the next 20 minutes reordered the way she understood the last 3 months. Dunmore was not a creditor. He was as near as Eli had been able to piece together from conversations around the ranch and in town, a land broker, a man who worked on behalf of buyers who wanted to remain anonymous, who identified properties with some weakness or leverage point, and applied pressure until they could be acquired cheaply. He had been operating in the territory for 2 years. 3 properties had changed hands under his approach. All 3 sellers had described the process afterward as feeling less like a sale and more like a surrender. Gable's way station sat on a piece of land that had water access on 2 sides, in a dry year that was worth more than the building. "He's not in debt," Martha said slowly. "He's being pushed out." "That's what it looks like," Eli said. "And he hasn't told anyone." "He wouldn't," Eli said. "Man like Gable telling people he's in trouble is worse than the trouble." She sat with that. "What happens to the people who work here," she said, "if he sells?" Eli was quiet for a moment. "New owner clears the staff," he said. "Usually, brings in their own." She nodded. She had known that was the answer. She had simply needed to hear it said out loud, which was different from knowing it privately. "So," she said, "less pay, more work, and possibly no job by spring." "Possibly." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" He met her eyes. "Because you asked," he said, "and because you deserved to know a long time ago, and no one thought to tell you." She sat back. Outside, the wind had dropped and the street was quiet. From the kitchen, she could hear the small sounds of the fire settling. Hector had gone home. It was just the 2 of them, and the morning, and a situation that had just changed shape entirely. "I have been preparing food for the man who may be about to lose this place," she said, "and he cut my wages and increased my hours, and he told a buyer I was nothing special, and he has not once in 9 years thought to inform me of anything that might affect my life." She paused. "I understand him perfectly, and I have spent 9 years keeping his kitchen running, and I feel like the world's largest fool." "You're not a fool," Eli said. "I trusted stability," she said. "That's close enough." He didn't argue. She appreciated that he didn't argue. They sat in silence for a moment, and it was the first silence between them that felt genuinely shared, not the awkward quiet of two people who don't know each other well enough to fill it, but the quiet of two people who are thinking through something together. "What are you going to do?" he said. She looked at her hands. Flour under the nails. A small burn scar on the side of her right thumb from 3 weeks ago. Hands that had worked every day of her adult life and produced by her own careful accounting more food than she could calculate and more comfort than anyone in this room had ever acknowledged. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I'm going to stop saying yes without thinking about it first." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter and more serious than a smile. "That's a start," he said. She stood up, straightened her apron, picked up the empty cups. "You can come in through the front door like a customer," she said without looking at him. "Or you can stay out of my kitchen. Those are the options." "Understood," he said. "Good." She carried the cups back and pushed through the kitchen door. She stood at her stove. The fire was steady. The starter was fed. The morning was still young, and already it had been the longest morning she could remember in years. She picked up the mixing bowl. She began measuring flour. Her hands were steady, but something inside her, something that had been very carefully, very deliberately held in one position for a very long time, had shifted. Not broken, not resolved, just shifted. The way a stone shifts at the bottom of a river, when the current changes, same stone, same river, different relationship between them. She measured. She poured. She worked the dough. Outside, she heard his boots on the floor, steady and unhurried, moving toward the door. She heard him stop, and then just before the door opened, she heard him say quietly, not directed at her, almost to himself, 9 years. And then he was gone. She stood in her kitchen with her hands in the dough, and her mother's starter on the shelf, and 9 years sitting in her chest, like something that was only now beginning to thaw, and she thought, all right, all right. She pressed into the dough and let the rhythm of it carry her forward, and she did not allow herself to think about what came next, because what came next was not yet visible. And she had learned a long time ago that you do not look for the horizon when you are still standing in the dark. But she was, for the first time, in a very long time, beginning to feel something she had not felt in so long. She had to look at it twice before she recognized it. She pressed her hands into the warm dough and felt the resistance of it push back alive, honest, unignorable, and she recognized it. It was the feeling of being worth fighting for. Not by him. Not by anyone outside this kitchen. By herself. She told herself it was just flour and water. That was all the sourdough starter was, at its most basic, flour and water and wild yeast caught from the air, fed and tended until it became something alive. Her mother had explained it to her that way when Martha was 7 years old, standing on a wooden step stool, so she could reach the counter, watching those practiced hands work the mixture with a patience that seemed to a child almost supernatural. "It's just flour and water," her mother had said. "But you have to mean it." Martha had been turning that sentence over in her mind for 18 years, and she still wasn't entirely sure she understood it. She understood it more today than she had yesterday, which was perhaps all meaning ever did, arrived slowly in pieces, like a horizon you only reached by walking. She was thinking about this on Monday morning, 4:15 hands in the dough, when Mr. Gable appeared in the kitchen doorway 15 minutes earlier than usual, which was the first signal that the day was going to be a particular kind of difficult. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, as if he were checking that the stove was on. Functional. Present. Not a person. "I need you to take on the supply ordering," he said. She stopped kneading. "Polly's mother is worse," he said. "She won't be back. I need someone to handle the weekly order from Tanner's." "That's a different job," she said. "It's a job I need done." What does it pay? The question hung in the air between them. It was the first time in 9 years she had asked him that question. She felt him register it, a slight tightening around the eyes, the barest recalibration. Same wages, he said. You're already here. I'm already here, she said evenly, and doing the work of 2 people for wages you already cut. Supply ordering is a 3rd position. Martha. His voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted to sound like he was being patient. I don't have the margin for. I'm not arguing with you, Mr. Gable, she said. I'm telling you what's fair. If you want fair, you know where to find me. If you need the ordering done by someone willing to do it for nothing, you'll have to find that person elsewhere. She went back to the dough. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She could feel the weight of his silence, the way you feel weather changing, a pressure shift, a held breath. Then he left. She exhaled through her nose and kept kneading. Her hands shook very slightly, which she acknowledged and then ignored because the dough required consistency and the shaking would pass. It did inside of a minute. She had just told her employer no. In 9 years she had never told him no. She had said yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, until yes had become her whole vocabulary, and she had just said something else and the world had not ended, which was both a relief and a revelation. She thought about what Eli had said on Sunday, about the feeling of being worth fighting for. She pressed her hands into the dough. He came in at 7:30 that morning, same as always, same table hat on the edge, coffee in hand. She brought his cup before he asked for it. Efficiency, she still called it, and she had stopped embarrassing herself about the word, and he looked up at her and said, Morning. Morning, she said. She started to turn, and then stopped herself, which was new. I told him no, she said. About the supply ordering, this morning. Eli looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, quiet, attentive. How'd that go? He said. He left, she said. I don't know yet how it went. I'll know more by tonight. He nodded. How do you feel? She considered the question seriously, because he had asked it seriously. Like I swallowed something large, she said, and I'm waiting to find out if it was medicine or poison. The corner of his mouth moved. That's about right, he said. She went back to the kitchen. The morning rush came in and she worked through it, and at 9:30 during the quiet after the crowd had thinned, Mr. Gable reappeared in the kitchen doorway. 2 bits more a week, he said, for the ordering. She looked at him. 2 bits was not fair. It was not close to fair. But it was something, and something was different from nothing, and he had come back, which told her more than the number did. All right, she said. He nodded and left. She stood at the stove with a ladle in her hand and thought, he came back. He had expected her to fold. She had not folded, and he had come back. This was information. She filed it carefully, the way she filed everything, not discarded, not acted on immediately, just held somewhere accessible. 2 bits more. She would remember the amount, and she would remember that she had asked. That evening, after the floor was swept, and the fire was banked, and Hector had gone home, she was counting the week's dry goods, a task she had always done unofficially, because someone had to, and it was easier for her to do it than to explain to Mr. Gable why the flour was low when she found the ledger. It was on the shelf behind the molasses tins, which was an odd place for a ledger, but Mr. Gable was an odd man, and she had stopped trying to understand his organizational logic years ago. She found it because she was reaching for the tin, and her hand hit the spine of it, and it fell, and she picked it up to put it back, and she saw the number on the open page. She stood very still. She read the number again. Then she closed the ledger and put it back behind the molasses tin, exactly where it had been. She finished counting the dry goods. She banked the fire. She went to her back room and lay down on her cot. She stared at the ceiling. The number in the ledger was not a debt. It was not an account payable. It was a valuation, a property valuation written in a hand she didn't recognize with a date from 6 weeks ago. The date was 2 weeks before Mr. Gable had cut her wages. He had known. 6 weeks ago, when Dunmore's men were already circling, when the valuation had already been done, he had known that this place might be sold or surrendered. And 2 weeks later, he had cut her wages and given her more work because if the building was going to be taken from him anyway, her wages were an expense with no return. He had known, and he had said nothing, and she had said yes, Mr. Gable, and gone back to her dough. She lay on her cot, and she thought about 9 years. She thought about the 4:30 mornings, and the midnight finishes, and the sourdough starter she had kept alive through 2 harsh winters by sleeping with it wrapped in cloth next to her body because the kitchen dropped below freezing, and she had been afraid for it. She thought about the flour on her hands, that she could never quite get all the way out from under her nails. She thought about the men who ate her food and never looked at her face, and the man who had looked at her face, and the ledger behind the molasses tin. She did not sleep until after midnight. She was up at 4. She made the biscuits. Eli came in at 7:30. She brought his coffee. She set it down. She sat in the empty chair across from him, which she had never done before. He looked at her. "I found a ledger last night," she said. His expression didn't change much, but his attention sharpened in a way she had learned to read. "What kind of ledger?" "Property valuation," she said. 6 weeks old. Dunmore's name isn't in it, but the numbers are his. I looked up the county assessor's format, and this matches. "You looked up the county assessor's format," he said. "I went to the courthouse this morning at 6 before I started the fire," she said. "They open early. The clerk was surprised to see me." A pause. "At 6 in the morning." I couldn't sleep. He looked at her for a moment, and she would not identify what was in his face, because she was still a practical woman, and she had a practical problem to solve. "What did the valuation say?" he said. She told him the number. He was quiet for a moment. "That's twice what the place is worth on the market." "I know," she said. "Which means it's not the building they want." "It's the water access," he said. "That was my thought." He turned the cup in his hands. "Martha, why are you telling me this?" It was a fair question. She had asked it of herself 3 times between the courthouse and the kitchen. "Because you told me about Dunmore," she said. "And because you pay attention. And because—" She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the table. "Because I am trying to understand what my situation actually is, and when I tried to understand it alone at midnight on a cot in a room the size of a closet, I kept going in circles. And you are the only person in this town who has given me information without wanting something back for it." He looked at her steadily. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know if he can be stopped," she said. "Dunmore, I want to know if there is any way this place stays standing, and I stay in my kitchen, or if I need to start making plans for something else." He was quiet for a long moment. The room moved around them. Hector carrying a tray, 2 men at the back table, talking low, the fire settling, and they sat in the middle of it like a still point. "Dunmore works through pressure," Eli said finally. "He finds the weak spot, and he pushes until something gives. With Gable, the weak spot is the water access. If Gable loses the water rights, the property value drops by half, and Dunmore can lowball the purchase." "How does he lose the water rights?" "That's what I've been trying to find out." Eli paused. "There's a man in town named Aldrich runs the land office. He and Dunmore have had 2 private meetings in the past month, according to the clerk at the surveyor's office." "You know the clerk at the surveyor's office?" she said. "I pay attention," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. "What does it mean, those 2 meeting?" "It means the pressure isn't just financial," he said. "Someone may be attempting to refile the water claim. If Aldrich files a challenge to the original deed, Gable has to contest it, which costs money he may not have, which means he sells or surrenders before the legal fight bankrupts him," she said. "Yes." She sat with that. Outside a wagon passed. The sound of the wheels on the frozen ground came through the wall and faded. "Does Mr. Gable know about Aldrich?" she said. "I don't know. I need to find out." He looked at her. "How?" "I have been in this kitchen for 9 years, she said. "Mr. Gable has eaten breakfast here every morning for 9 years. He talks to himself when he thinks he's alone. He has never once considered whether I might be listening, because he has never once considered that I might matter enough to listen to." She paused. "I am going to start listening." Something moved in Eli's face. It was respect unqualified, clean, the kind you couldn't manufacture. "All right," he said. She stood up. She straightened her apron. "This doesn't mean I'm not also making plans for something else," she said. "I'm not staking everything on a man who called me nothing special." "That's wise," he said. She went back to the kitchen. For the next 4 days she listened. It was not difficult. It was, in fact, one of the easiest things she had done in a long time, because she had been practicing without knowing it for 9 years. She moved through the front room, and she carried trays, and she refilled coffee, and she cleared tables, and she was invisible in the way she had always been invisible, and the men in that room talked around her the way they always did, as if she were furniture, and she heard everything. On Tuesday, she heard Mr. Gable on the telephone. The machine had been installed 6 months ago, one of the few modern concessions he'd made, telling someone that he needed more time. His voice was tight and thin, the wire under tension sound she knew. On Wednesday, she overheard Dunmore's men. Again they came in for coffee, 2 of them, and sat at the back table and spoke to each other in the low, confident tones of people who have decided the outcome of something and are simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She heard the name Aldrich. She heard the words, water deed. She heard one of them say April, which was 3 months away. On Thursday, she heard Mr. Gable in the office. The door was not fully closed, and she was sweeping the hallway, which was part of her job, and therefore unremarkable, saying to someone she couldn't see, "I don't have a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer." She filed all of it. On Friday morning, Eli came in, and she sat across from him again, and she told him what she'd heard. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "April," he said. "That's what they said. That gives Gable roughly 12 weeks to contest the water claim filing if he moves fast." He paused. "He's not going to move fast. He doesn't know what he's dealing with." "Someone needs to tell him," she said. "Yes." "He won't listen to me," she said. Not with bitterness, just fact laid flat. "He might not listen to me either," Eli said. "But I have a different standing. I'm the Circle K foreman. That's land. That's water. That's a conversation he can't dismiss the same way." She looked at him. "You do that." "I'll talk to him today," he said. She felt something shift in her chest. Gratitude, but also something more complicated. She was not accustomed to people doing things on her behalf. She was not entirely sure how to hold it. "Why?" she said. He met her eyes. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because I pay attention, and what I've been paying attention to for 2 weeks tells me that this kitchen and the woman running it are worth a good deal more than what's about to happen to them if nobody does anything." She sat with that for a moment. "Don't tell him I found the ledger," she said. "No," he agreed. "I won't." She went back to the kitchen. She heard them talking at 2 in the afternoon after the lunch rush. She was in the kitchen, and the voices were muffled, but she could hear the shape of the conversation. Eli's measured cadence. Mr. Gable's voice going up and then coming back down, up and back down, the way a man's voice moves when he's being told something he doesn't want to hear but can't dispute. It went on for 20 minutes. When Eli came through the kitchen doorway afterward, she looked up from the pot she was stirring. He said he knew about Aldrich. He didn't know about the April timeline. How did he take it? Like a man who's been half asleep at the reins and just realized the horse is on the edge of a cliff, he said. "He's scared, but he heard me." "Will he do anything?" "I gave him the name of a man in the county seat who handles land disputes," he said. "Said I'd go with him to make the introduction if he wanted." She stared at him. "You'd do that too. I have business in the county seat this month anyway," he said. The slight deflection was so characteristic of him that she almost smiled for real this time. "Eli," she said. He looked at her. She had used his first name. She hadn't meant to, or she had meant to without quite deciding to which was a different thing. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. You did the work, he said. You found the ledger, you went to the courthouse at 6 in the morning, you listened for 4 days. I just made an introduction. You made me feel like the information was worth something, she said. Like I was worth something. That's not a small thing. The kitchen was quiet. The fire was low. Outside the wind had picked up and she could hear it pressing at the walls. You've always been worth something, he said. That was true before I walked in the door. She turned back to the pot. She stirred it slowly without seeing it. After a moment, she heard him move toward the kitchen door. Martha? Yes, she said, still not turning. For what it's worth, he said. The thing you said this morning about making plans for something else. Don't stop doing that, regardless of how this goes with Gable. She stilled. What do you mean? She said carefully. I mean, he said, that a woman who goes to the courthouse at 6 in the morning and finds a legal filing format and matches it to a kitchen ledger in 12 hours, that woman should not be spending her life in someone else's kitchen. She turned then. He was in the doorway. The late afternoon light was behind him. He was looking at her with that steady, unhurried attention that she had. She might as well admit it to herself, come to depend on, in the way you come to depend on a compass point. Not because you couldn't find direction without it, but because it made the finding easier. What would you suggest? She said. I don't know yet, he said. But I'm thinking about it. He left. She stood at her stove, and she was thinking about it too, which was the problem, because she was supposed to be thinking about the soup. The following week was the fastest week of the past 9 years. Mr. Gable went to the county seat on Wednesday. He came back Thursday evening, looking like a man who had been through a physical trial, wrung out pale, but with something different in his posture. Less slope, less surrender. He appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7 Thursday night. The lawyer thinks we have a case, he said. She kept stirring. Good. He said the original deed is solid. Aldrich's filing has a procedural weakness. He paused. Marsh knew what he was talking about. Marsh usually does, she said. Another pause. I've been running this place 9 years, he said. I know, she said. You've been here the whole time. She stopped stirring. She looked at him. He was not, she realized, about to say something magnanimous. He was not capable of magnanimous. He was a man who had built his life around a narrow self-interest and had been startled briefly into seeing slightly past it, and this was as far as he was going to get. You have? She said. I have. He nodded. That was all. He left. She stood there. That was not an apology. It was not acknowledgement, not really. It was the verbal equivalent of a man nearly tripping and catching himself and hoping no one had seen. And yet, it was the first time in 9 years that he had come to find her to tell her something, rather than to give her something to do. She supposed that counted. She kept the count very low, but she supposed it counted. She fed the starter that night and held the crock for longer than was necessary, just holding the warmth of it in her palms, feeling the live weight of it, the thing her mother had tended before her, and she had tended after unbroken. 30 years of mornings in this little clay crock. She set it back on the shelf. She was still standing there, hand on the shelf, when she heard boots on the back steps. The kitchen entrance, which no one used except her and Hector. She turned. Eli opened the door and stepped in from the cold, bringing with him a gust of night air and the smell of horses and wood smoke. He was still in his work coat. His hat had frost on the brim. It's late, she said. I know. He closed the door. I heard from the Circle K owner today. Dunmore approached him last month. She went still. About what? Our water access, he said. The East Creek boundary. Same pattern challenged the deed filing, looking for a procedural weakness. He's going after multiple properties at once, she said. 3 in the county, best I can tell. Gable's the Circle K East parcel and the Halverson farm up north. He paused. He's not a land broker working for a buyer. He's building something. A consolidation. She thought about that. How much land? Enough to control most of the water access through the valley, he said. If he gets it all, he can price out every ranch and way station within 30 miles. The scale of it hit her. Not just Gable's place, not just her kitchen, but the whole territory. The whole complex web of lives and livelihoods that ran on water access, and a man quietly, methodically cutting it off. "Does the Circle K owner know?" she said. "I told him today. He's contacting the other 2 owners." He paused. 3 property owners contesting simultaneously makes the legal challenge much harder to sustain. Dunmore can pick them off 1 at a time, but 3 at once, with a coordinated defense. He'd have to back off or commit to a fight he can't afford, she said. "That's the idea." She looked at him. He was cold and tired, and he had come here to her kitchen at the end of a long day to tell her this. "You could have told me tomorrow morning," she said. "I could have," he said. She understood. He had come tonight because he had known she would lie awake worrying if she didn't have the information, and he had made the calculation without being asked, without credit, that her peace of mind was worth a cold ride across town. She felt something give way inside her. Not dramatically. Just gave way the way ice gives way in early spring, quietly 1 layer at a time, until one morning you look and the river is running clear. "Eli," she said. "Yes." "Sit down," she said. "I'll make coffee." He sat down at the kitchen table, her table, the one she ate at alone every night, and she put the pot on, and they sat in the kitchen together in the late night, and she poured the coffee, and they talked. Not about Dunmore, not about ledgers or water rights or legal filings. She asked him about Texas. He told her about the drive up the distances, the weather, the particular loneliness of a cattle drive that most people didn't understand unless they'd done it. She told him about coming to this town at 16 with her mother's starter, and $18, and a letter of reference from a woman who had since died, and the way the first winter had been harder than anything she'd imagined, and how she'd nearly left twice and hadn't, and she had never told anyone that before. He listened the way he always listened, fully, without agenda, without waiting for his turn. "Why didn't you leave?" he said. She considered. "The starter," she said. "I know that sounds like a small reason, but it had survived the journey here. It felt like leaving would be betraying the surviving." He was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't sound small to me," he said. She looked at her hands around the coffee cup. "I think I stayed too long," she said. "I think I confused surviving with living." "Most people do," he said. "Especially people who have to work hard just to survive. The hard work fills up the space where living would be." She looked at him. "Is that what happened to you on the trail?" Something shifted in his face. A brief opening quickly managed. "Some of it," he said. "You don't have to say," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm thinking about how." She waited. She was good at waiting, though usually she did it differently. Compressed, defended. This was a different kind of waiting. Easier. "I had a place once," he said. "A small ranch, down in Texas. I had it for 6 years. Then there was a bad year drought, and then a market drop, and I lost it." He paused. "And after that, I was on the trail for a long time, because being on the trail means you don't have to be anywhere in particular, and not being anywhere in particular meant I didn't have to think about what I'd lost." She looked at him. "When did you stop doing that?" He met her eyes. "Recently," he said. The fire popped. Outside the wind had dropped and the night was very quiet. She understood with a certainty that arrived all at once that he had not come to this town by accident. He had come because the Circle K needed a foreman, yes, but also because a man who had been on the trail for 2 years looking for the next horizon sometimes found what he was actually looking for when he stopped moving and walked through a particular door. She understood with equal certainty that she was not going to say any of this out loud. Not tonight. She was a practical woman, and there was a great deal still unsettled, and she did not yet know what the coming months would bring. But she held it. She held it in the same place she held the other things she filed for later, carefully, accessibly ready. She refilled his cup. He looked at the little crock on the shelf. "How old is it now?" 27 years since my mother started it," she said. 18 years since she passed it to me." "That's a long time to keep something alive," he said. You have to mean it, she said. Every day. Even the days you're tired. Especially those days. He looked at her, and she thought yes. That was it exactly. You had to mean it every day, especially the days you were tired. Her mother hadn't been talking about bread. She picked up both cups and carried them to the basin. It's late, she said, and I start at 4:30. I know, he said. He stood. He picked up his hat. He looked at her one more time with those creekwater eyes, and then he said quietly, Good night, Martha. Good night, she said. She listened to his boots on the back steps, and then the door, and then the night, swallowing the sound of him. She stood in her kitchen. The fire was low. The crock was on the shelf. The coffee cup sat in the basin waiting for morning. The whole kitchen was exactly as it always was. Her kitchen, her fire, her bread, her life and everything in it was the same, and nothing felt the same at all. She went to her cot. She lay in the dark. She did not go in circles this time. She thought with a clarity that surprised her by its steadiness, something is coming. She did not know exactly what it was. She did not know if Gable's place would survive the winter or Dunmore's pressure. She did not know what Eli Marsh meant when he said he was thinking about it. She did not know what the next months would look like, or whether she would still be in this kitchen when the spring came, or somewhere she hadn't imagined yet. But she knew, and this was new. This was the thing that was different, that she was not going to meet whatever came by saying yes and going back to the dough. She was going to meet it with her eyes open and her hands ready, and the full use of everything she had, the things she knew, the things she felt, the things she had been taught by a woman with flour on her hands who said that bread knows when you don't care. She cared. She had always cared. That had never been the problem. The problem was that she had been caring in the dark alone, where no one could see it, and that she thought that part was about to change. She was up at 4 the next morning, same as always, but something had shifted in the quality of the rising. It was not hope exactly. Hope was a thing that looked forward, and Martha had trained herself for years not to look too far forward, because the distance between where she was and where forward led had always seemed too large to cross without stumbling. What she felt this morning was something shorter ranged and more reliable than hope. It was intention. She was going to do things today, specific things with her eyes open, and that was different from simply enduring the day until it ended. She made the biscuits. She fed the starter. She had the fire going and the first pot of coffee on before 4:45, which was fast even for her. Hector came in at 6 and found her reorganizing the dry goods shelf in a way she had been meaning to do for 2 years. You're in a mood, he said. I'm in a practical mood, she said. There's a difference. What's the difference? One of them gets things done, she said. Hand me the salt. He handed her the salt. He watched her for a moment with the particular look he got when he was trying to decide whether to ask something. Ask it, she said. Is Mr. Marsh coming in today? She did not stop reorganizing. He comes in every morning. I know, but... Hector paused. He asked me yesterday if you ever got a day off. She stopped. She turned to look at Hector, who was now studying the ceiling with great interest. What did you tell him? She said. I said you didn't take days off, you just took mornings where you went to the courthouse before the fire. He attempted innocence and failed entirely. She turned back to the shelf. I see. He seemed interested in the answer. Hector. Yes, ma'am. You're going to burn the oatmeal. He went to the oatmeal. Eli came in at 7:30. She brought his coffee. He looked up at her, and she looked back at him, and she said before either of them could go through the usual morning mechanics, Did you ask Hector if I get days off? Something in his face did not quite conceal a reaction. I did, he said. Why? He turned the cup in his hands. Because I wanted to ask you something and I wasn't sure you'd have time for it. She waited. There's a public hearing, he said. At the county courthouse, day after tomorrow, on the water deed challenge. Aldrich filed it formally last week, which means it's public record now, and the hearing is open. He paused. I thought you might want to be there. She looked at him steadily. You want me at the courthouse. I think you've earned the right to see how this plays out, he said. And I think... He stopped briefly, and in the stop was something careful and considered. I think it would be useful to have someone there who knows every detail of what Gable's operation actually is. Not the paperwork. The real thing. In case there are questions the lawyer can't answer. She thought about that. You want me as a resource. I want you there, he said. As whatever you decide to be. She looked at him for a long moment. I'll see if Mr. Gable will manage the morning without me, she said. He managed mornings for years before you, Eli said. He'll survive 2 hours. He didn't manage them well, she said. No, he agreed. He didn't. She went back to the kitchen, and the morning proceeded the way mornings did, and she did not let herself think about it more than was useful, which was the kind of lie she told herself with less success than she once had. She spoke to Mr. Gable at midday. She told him she needed the morning off, day after tomorrow, and she told him why the hearing the water deed the public record. He stared at her. You've been following this, he said. Yes, she said. How long? Since I found the ledger behind the molasses tin, she said. There was no point in the fiction anymore. 6 weeks ago. His face did a complicated series of things. She watched them all without particular expression. You could have told me, he said. You could have told me, she said. Not unkindly, just factually. You knew the valuation had been done. You knew what Dunmore was. You cut my wages 2 weeks later and said nothing. The silence between them had a particular texture, not hostile, but honest, which was something it had not been before. You're right, he said. It seemed to cost him something. You're right. I should have... He stopped, started again. I didn't think it was your concern. You didn't think I was a person it would concern, she said. There's a difference. He looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at her. Take the morning, he said. She nodded. She went back to the kitchen. She stood at the counter and felt something move through her that was not quite victory and not quite relief. It was the satisfaction of a thing named correctly. That was all. She had named the thing correctly, and he had not disputed it, and that was for now enough. The next morning she was in the kitchen before 4 as usual, but her mind was already at the courthouse, which made the biscuits come out slightly uneven on the left side of the tray, which bothered her out of all proportion, and she corrected them before anyone saw. Eli came in and she sat across from him, and they went over what she knew, the timeline, the names, the specific details of the water access that she had been compiling in her head since the Sunday Dunmore's men had come in and grabbed Hector. The East Creek boundary, she said. The original deed says the water rights run with the land, regardless of seasonal variation in flow. Aldrich's filing challenges the seasonal clause, says that in a dry year, the rights revert to county control. Eli was very still. How do you know the exact language of the challenge? I went back to the courthouse, she said. When? Last Tuesday, she said. At 6. He looked at her for a moment. Then, the seasonal clause argument is weak if the original deed predates the county ordinance that established the reversion policy. The original deed is from 1861, she said. The county ordinance is from 1869. His expression sharpened into something she recognized, the look of a man who has just had a confirmation he was hoping for. Then Aldrich's filing fails on its face. The deed predates the ordinance by 8 years. That's what I thought, she said. But I'm not a lawyer. No, he said. But you did the lawyer's work. She said nothing. She drank her coffee. Martha, he said, and she looked at him. When this is over, whatever happens with Gables, I want to talk to you about something. She held his gaze. You can talk to me about it now. Not yet, he said. I want to wait until the hearing is done. I don't want it tangled up with all this. She studied him. All right, she said. She went back to the kitchen, and she told herself she was not thinking about it, and by noon she had thought about it approximately 40 times, which was a personal record and absolutely unacceptable. The courthouse the next morning was not as she'd imagined it. Or rather, it was exactly as she'd imagined it, which was the problem, because she had spent enough time there in the early mornings to know the building, but she had not imagined herself sitting in a room full of men who were making decisions about things that affected her life and being present as something other than invisible. She sat in the third row. Eli was beside her. Mr. Gable was at the front table with his lawyer, a compact, sharp-eyed man named Ferris, who had driven up from the county seat, and who had, upon reviewing the deed documentation, reportedly said, "This is solid, and whoever found the ordinance date is sharper than most of my clerks." Martha knew who had found it. She had not been introduced to Ferris. That was fine. Dunmore himself was not in the room, which told her something. His legal representative was a man in a city coat whose name she did not catch, but whose manner she read precisely a man hired to apply pressure not to prevail. He had the posture of someone who expected the other side to fold before the hearing got complicated. He was about to be surprised. Ferris presented the original deed. He presented the date. He presented the county ordinance and its date. He laid them next to each other on the record, and said with the calm of a man setting down something heavy, "The challenge fails on its face. The deed predates the ordinance by 8 years. There is no legal mechanism by which a later ordinance can retroactively diminish rights established by an earlier deed without legislative action, of which there has been none." The room was quiet. Dunmore's representative said something in a low voice to the hearing officer that Martha couldn't hear. The hearing officer reviewed the documents. He looked up. He said, "Motion to challenge is denied. The original deed stands. Water rights are confirmed as appurtenant to the property." Mr. Gable made a sound that might have been the first honest exhale he'd taken in 2 months. Eli beside her was still. She could feel the quality of his stillness, not surprise but satisfaction, which was different. He had expected this. He had worked toward this. She looked at her hands in her lap. It was over. Or this part of it was over. Dunmore would not vanish. Men like that did not vanish over a single legal setback. But the pressure had a limit now, and the limit was documented and public, and that was a different kind of safety than she had been living with before. On the way out, Mr. Gable stopped beside her. He said, "The ordinance date." "Yes," she said. "Ferris said someone found it." He looked at her. "Was it you?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Uncomfortable, searching the expression of a man who is revising something he thought he knew. He said, "Thank you, Martha." She said, "You're welcome, Mr. Gable." She walked out into the cold morning air. Eli fell into step beside her. They walked a half block in silence before he said, "You all right?" "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true and she was done not saying true things, "I'm better than all right. I'm angry, actually." "Angry? I just helped save a building," she said, "that I have worked in for 9 years for a man who didn't think to tell me it was in danger, and whose lawyer didn't know my name, and who just thanked me in the same voice he'd used to thank a hired hand he didn't plan to promote." She paused. "That's an accurate summary of this morning." Eli was quiet for a moment. "It is," he said. "I saved it anyway," she said. "Because the people who depend on that kitchen Hector, the men who come in off the trail, they deserve to eat. That's why I did it. Not for Gable." "I know," he said. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "You said you wanted to talk to me," she said, "when this was over." He looked at her. "I did." "It's over," she said. He turned to face her fully. The cold morning air was around them, and the street was beginning to fill with the ordinary sounds of the day, and he stood in the middle of it with his hat in his hands and looked at her with those direct, unhurried eyes that she had come to understand were simply the way he looked at things. He took seriously. "I want to offer you a job," he said. She waited. "The Circle K needs a cook," he said. "Not a kitchen hand, a cook. Someone to run the cookhouse, manage the supplies, feed the crew. It's a real position with a real wage, which I can tell you the exact number of right now if you want it." "Tell me," she said. He told her. She kept her face still. It was 3 times what Gable paid her. 3 times after the cut. "There's a cabin," he said. "Small, but it's yours alone. Private, with a kitchen that has a proper stove and a window on the east side." He paused. "For the morning light." She looked at him. "For the morning light," she said. "You mentioned once that you liked the early mornings," he said. "The window faces east." She had mentioned it. Weeks ago, in passing, the way you mentioned something you don't expect anyone to hold on to. He had held on to it. "Eli," she said. "Yes. Are you offering me this because—" She stopped. She was not good at this kind of asking. She had not had practice. "Is this about the job? Only?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion, but the quiet of a man choosing his words with the care they deserved. "The job is real," he said. "The offer stands regardless of anything else. You can come to the Circle K and run that kitchen, and it will be a good arrangement for the ranch and a fair one for you, and nothing needs to be anything other than that." He paused. "But I'd be lying to you if I said the job was the only reason I'm standing here asking." She held his gaze. "What's the other reason?" she said. "I think you know it," he said quietly. She did know it. She had known it for weeks in the way you know the shape of a room you've been standing in with your eyes closed, by the way the air moves by the space between things. "I'm not a woman who makes decisions quickly," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for quickly." "I would need to give Mr. Gable notice," she said. 2 weeks, he said. "That's fair?" "I would need to see the cabin before I commit to anything." "Of course. And the kitchen," she said. "I need to see the kitchen." "I'll take you out there this Sunday," he said. "If you want." She looked at him for a long moment. The street around them was fully awake now. People moving past wagons in the road, the ordinary sounds of a frontier town going about its morning. And the two of them stood in the middle of it having a conversation that she had not even in her most recent and tentatively hopeful moments quite imagined having. "All right," she said. "Sunday." He put his hat back on. He touched the brim. That small deliberate gesture that she had come to understand was his version of a great many things he didn't say out loud. She went back to the kitchen. She stood at her stove. She was still there when Hector came in at midday, took one look at her face and said, "Something happened." "Several things happened," she said. "Good things." She considered. "Yes," she said. "I think so." He beamed at her with the uncomplicated joy that 16-year-olds were occasionally capable of, and she felt the corners of her mouth do something involuntary in response. "Don't make anything of it," she said. "No, ma'am," he said, already making everything of it. She turned back to the stove. Sunday came with a hard frost that turned the ground iron solid and made the walk to the livery sharp and bright, her breath visible in front of her. Eli was waiting with a wagon which was practical, and also she noted more comfortable than riding, which she did not know how to do well and had never mentioned. She did not ask if he'd known this. She suspected he had. The drive to the Circle K took 40 minutes. They talked about small things, the weather, the state of the roads, a conversation she'd overheard between 2 drovers about the spring cattle prices, and underneath the small things ran something warmer and more serious, the way a current runs under ice. You knew it was there by the movement. The cookhouse was larger than she'd expected. The stove was a good one, newer than anything at Gable's, with a properly fitted stovepipe that would not rattle. The counter space was generous. The window did face east, and the light through it, even on a winter morning, had a quality that was, she admitted to herself, very good. The supply shelves were badly organized, and the inventory was a shambles, which she did not say, but filed for later. The cabin was 50 steps from the cookhouse. She stood in the middle of the single room and turned slowly around and looked at the space that would be, if she said yes, hers, not borrowed, not the back room of someone else's building. Hers, with a door she could close and a window she could open and 4 walls that contained her and nothing else. She stood there for a long time. Eli stayed in the doorway. He did not rush her. She looked at the shelf beside the window. It was the right height. It was the right depth. It would hold a clay crock without any trouble at all. She turned to him. "The supply shelves in the cookhouse," she said. "They need to be completely reorganized." "I know," he said. "And whoever's been ordering the flour has been ordering the wrong grade. You want a finer grind for biscuits." "All right." "The stovepipe needs a proper cap so it doesn't pull cold air in winter. I'll have it done before you start." She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, and his expression was careful and open at the same time. Careful with hope, she thought, which was the bravest kind. She thought about her mother's starter. She thought about 30 years of mornings in that little crock, passed from one set of hands to another, kept alive by intention. She thought about what her mother had said. "You have to mean it." She meant it. She meant the kitchen and the cabin and the honest wage and the window facing east. She meant the man in the doorway who had asked her name when no one else thought to ask it, who had held on to the detail about morning light, who had come to her kitchen in the late night to bring her information she needed, because he had understood without being told that her peace of mind mattered. She meant all of it. "I'll need a proper cabinet for the dry goods," she said, "with doors so the dust stays out." "Done," he said. "And I want to bring my own things," she said. "Just a few. There isn't much." "Bring everything," he said. She looked at him one more time. Then she took a breath, a real one, the kind that goes all the way down. "2 weeks' notice to Mr. Gable," she said. "I don't want to leave him without a plan." "That's fair," he said. "And I'm going to teach whoever he hires next," she said. "Enough to keep the kitchen running, because Hector deserves to work somewhere that doesn't fall apart." "Of course," he said. She walked toward the doorway. He stepped aside to let her through, and as she passed him, she stopped close enough that she could speak quietly and still be heard. And she said, "Thank you, for the job and for the other thing, both." He looked at her. Very close, very steady. "You earned the job," he said. "The other thing I'm just glad you'll let me." She went outside into the cold, bright morning. She stood in the yard and looked at the east side of the cabin and thought about what the light would look like on the first morning she spent there, waking up in a room that was hers, walking 50 steps to a kitchen that was hers to run, starting the fire and feeding the starter, and beginning the biscuits in a place where she was not invisible, and not nothing special, and not the woman everyone ate around without seeing. She thought about being seen, not by him, though that was part of it, by herself, seen by herself fully, and without the compression of 9 years of yes and yes and yes. She heard him come out of the cabin behind her. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. And she meant that too, all the way down the full depth of it, the kind of yes that was not surrender, but arrival. She climbed up onto the wagon. He climbed up beside her. They drove back toward town in the winter morning, and the road ahead of them was frozen and clear and long, and she did not look away from it. She gave Mr. Gable her notice on Monday morning. She did it the way she did most things that mattered directly, without softening it into something easier to receive. She walked into the front room before the rush set a cup of coffee in front of him at the counter and told him she was leaving in 2 weeks. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. He said, "Where?" "Circle K," she said. "Cookhouse position." Something moved across his face that she did not try to name. He picked up the coffee. He set it down. He said, "Marsh." "He offered a fair wage," she said, "and a kitchen worth working in." "My kitchen isn't worth working in." She looked at him steadily. "You cut my wages and gave me more work and told a buyer I was nothing special," she said. "You want me to answer that question?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Hector appeared in the kitchen doorway, read the room instantly, and disappeared again. "I'll need someone trained," Gable said finally. "I know," she said. "I'll train them. That's why I'm giving you 2 weeks instead of 1. He looked at her. "You're giving me 2 weeks out of fairness." "I'm giving you 2 weeks because Hector deserves a kitchen that doesn't collapse around him," she said. And because the men who come in off the trail deserve a hot meal. Not because of you." He flinched. It was small, but she saw it. "All right," he said. She went back to the kitchen. Hector was at the stove pretending to stir something that did not need stirring. She looked at the back of his head for a moment. "You heard," she said. "The walls are thin," he said. "Hector." He turned. His face was doing the thing where he was trying very hard to look like he was not about to be upset about something. "You're going to be fine," she said. "Whoever he hires, I'm going to teach them everything I know, and you already know more than you think you do." "It won't be the same," he said. "No," she said. "It won't." She was not going to lie to him about that. "But different isn't the same as worse. You know that." He nodded, not entirely convinced, and turned back to the stove. She let him have the moment. She understood it. She was feeling her own version of it, the complicated grief of leaving a place that had diminished you, because it was also the place where you had survived, and survival made everything harder to leave. She made the biscuits. She made them with the same care she always did, the right temperature, the right amount of working. The window of 2 minutes she could read by smell. She made them, and she thought, these are the last biscuits I'll make in this kitchen, and then she corrected herself because she had 2 weeks and she was not going to start counting down before it was time. Eli came in at 7:30. She brought his coffee and sat across from him, which was ordinary. Now it had become ordinary in the way that good things sometimes become ordinary before you've had time to appreciate them properly. "He took it well," Eli said. "He took it," she said. "That's enough." "Fair," he said. "He's going to struggle," she said. "Finding someone. This time of year in this town the good kitchen people are already placed." "Do you know anyone?" he said. She did, actually. There was a woman named Clara Voss who had been cooking at the hotel 2 towns over and whose employer had recently sold the property. She had run into Clara at the dry goods store 3 weeks ago, and they had talked for 20 minutes, which was a long conversation by Martha's standards, and she had come away thinking that woman knows what she's doing. "I might," she said. "I'll send a letter today." He looked at her. "You were already thinking about this." "I've been thinking about it since Sunday," she said. He shook his head slightly, not in criticism, but in that quiet, particular way he had when she did something that confirmed what he already thought about her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Eli." "I was thinking." He said that you have been solving other people's problems so long that it comes completely naturally to you, and that I would like to see what happens when you spend some of that energy on your own life. She held his gaze. "I'm doing that right now." "I know," he said. "I'm looking forward to watching it." She went back to the kitchen. She wrote the letter to Clara Voss in the 20 minutes between the breakfast rush and the start of lunch prep, and she made it efficient and honest and direct, 3 qualities she had come to trust in herself now that she was allowing herself to trust things. Clara wrote back in 4 days. She was interested. She could start in 10 days. Martha spent the remaining days of her notice teaching Clara everything she knew about the kitchen at Gables. Not just the recipes, but the rhythms of the place, the way the stove ran hot on the left side, the way the supply orders needed to be placed on Thursdays or the weekend, flour would run short, the particular morning timing of the biscuit window. She taught Clara the way her mother had taught her, with patience and precision, and the understanding that knowledge passed carefully from one set of hands to another was its own kind of legacy. On her last day at Gables, she cleaned the kitchen the way she had cleaned it 9 years' worth of mornings, thoroughly, completely, without leaving a corner undone. She scrubbed the stove. She reorganized the shelves. She checked the stovepipe. And then she stood in the middle of the kitchen, and she looked at it for a long moment. The crack in the plaster above the shelf where the lard was kept. Unchanged. She had stared at that crack 10,000 times. She would not stare at it again. She picked up the cloth bag that held her few things. She picked up the crock. She walked out. Hector was in the front room. He had been very studiously casual all morning, and it had not worked at all. He looked at her and opened his mouth, and she said before he could, "Come and see me at the Circle K. I'll make you biscuits." He smiled. It was a real one, and she was glad of it. She did not say goodbye to Mr. Gable. He did not appear to say goodbye to her. This felt correct. She walked out the front door of Gable's Way Station for the last time on a Thursday morning in late January, with her mother's sourdough starter in her arms, and the cold air against her face, and she did not look back. The Circle K was 40 minutes from town. Eli had arranged for the wagon same as Sunday, and he drove, and she sat beside him with the crock in her lap and her bag at her feet, and they did not talk much on the ride out. They didn't need to. The road and the cold and the space beside each other was enough. When the wagon came up to the cookhouse, she could see that the stovepipe had been capped. She noticed it immediately and looked at him. "Last week," he said before she could ask. "Ferris came out to handle some paperwork and I had him help me with the cap while he was here." "Ferris," she said. "The lawyer." "He's more useful with his hands than you'd think," Eli said. She got down from the wagon. She went into the cookhouse. The supply shelves had been reorganized, not perfectly, but close, clearly done by someone working from logic rather than experience, which meant him probably on an evening after the crew had gone. The flour was the right grade. A new cabinet stood against the east wall, solid wood, with doors that fit properly. She ran her hand along the top of the cabinet. She set the crock on the shelf beside the east window. The morning light was on it immediately, exactly as he'd said, a clean, honest light, the kind that showed things as they were. The crock sat in it, and she stood back and looked at it, and felt something in her chest complete itself like a sentence finally finding its period. She turned. Eli was in the doorway, hat in his hands, same as always. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She started the fire. The first morning at the Circle K was the strangest and the best morning she had had in years, because no one told her what to do. No one appeared in the doorway to give her additional tasks or cut her wages or tell a buyer she was nothing special. She simply worked her own rhythm, her own order, the fire building the way she wanted it, the dough developing the way she intended. And when the crew came in for breakfast at 6:30, she put food in front of men who looked at it, and then looked at her and said thank you, which was not extraordinary, but which she received with more feeling than she had expected. One of the older hands, a man named Russell, who had been at the Circle K longer than anyone, and whose face looked like it had been carved from something that objected to the process, picked up a biscuit and bit into it and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Lord Almighty?" Martha looked at him. "That's a biscuit," he said, with the solemn gravity of a man making an official pronouncement. "Yes, it is," she said. He looked at Eli. "Where'd you find her?" "She found herself," Eli said. "I just showed her the door." She did not let herself react to that, but she heard it land and she held it somewhere private. The days settled into a new rhythm quickly because Martha was good at rhythms. She rose at 5 now instead of 4:30. The Circle K crew ate later than the Way Station crowd, and the cookhouse was better equipped, which meant she could accomplish in an hour what had taken her 90 minutes before. The extra half hour in the morning was she discovered a thing she could use for herself. She used it to sit with the starter, to write in the small notebook she had bought at the dry goods store in town, to simply be still in her own kitchen in the early morning light while the rest of the ranch was quiet. She had not been still in the morning in 9 years. It turned out that being still in the morning was something she was very good at. Once, she remembered how. Eli did not appear at her breakfast table the way he had appeared at Gable's. He ate with the crew same as always, which was as it should be. But in the evenings after supper was cleared, and the cookhouse was clean, and the crew had gone to the bunkhouse, he would sometimes come by with a reason, a question about the supply order, a word about the week's schedule, once a broken hinge on the cabinet door that he repaired himself in about 10 minutes, and then stayed for coffee. The staying for coffee became its own thing, not every evening, 3 or 4 times a week, an hour, sometimes 2. She would put the pot on, and he would sit at the kitchen table, and they would talk, and the talking was different from any talking she had done in years, because it went both directions, and both directions mattered. She learned things about him in those evenings that the early morning conversations at Gable's had only sketched. She learned about the ranch in Texas, not just that he'd lost it, but what it had been, what he'd built there, the specific particular grief of watching something you made with your hands go to a bankman who barely looked at it. She learned that he had a sister in Kansas City who wrote letters he answered slowly and with great care. She learned that he had a weakness for strong coffee and a principled hatred of bad weather forecasting and an ability to listen to a person talk about bread fermentation for 40 minutes without once looking at the window, which she considered remarkable. He learned her too. She let him. This was new, being learnable, allowing someone access to the parts of herself she had kept compressed for years. It was uncomfortable in the way that any expansion is uncomfortable. The growing takes up space, and the space has to come from somewhere. She did not name what was happening between them, not yet. She was still a practical woman. Practical women did not name things before the conditions for naming them were stable. But she knew. And she was fairly certain he knew. And the knowing, shared between two people who were both accustomed to patience, created its own kind of warmth. It was February when the second wave of trouble arrived. She was in the cookhouse on a Wednesday morning, supply list in hand, when she heard raised voices from the direction of the main house. Not the usual sounds of ranch work, those she could read as easily as weather by now, but something sharp and escalating. She set down the list and went to the cookhouse door. Eli was crossing the yard with the long, quick stride she had learned to associate with situations that required his kind of quiet intervention. Behind him near the gate were two men on horseback. Not Dunmore's men, she didn't know these faces. But the posture was familiar. The deliberate, claiming posture of men who had been sent to deliver a message that wasn't a question. She stayed in the doorway. She heard one of the riders say, "Marsh, you're the foreman here. Tell your boss the water's going to be reclaimed regardless." The legal route didn't work. There are other routes. Eli stopped walking. He said nothing for a moment. The quality of his silence had a particular weight to it, the kind that made rooms smaller. "Ride off this property," he said. His voice was flat and absolute. "Do it now. Don't come back." "We'll be back," the man said. "Tell your boss." "I told you once," Eli said. Something in his voice closed off every available exit. The two men looked at each other. One of them said something low to the other. Then they rode. Eli stood in the yard watching them until they were through the gate and down the road. Then he turned and walked directly to the cookhouse. She stepped back from the doorway. He came in. "Dunmore," she said. "Or someone working for him," he said. The legal route failed, so now it's intimidation. "He tried this with Gable," she said. "Yes, and Gable folded. Dunmore expects the same pattern." She looked at him. "Does Mr. Calloway know?" Calloway was the Circle K's owner, a retired cattleman who had left day-to-day operations entirely to Eli and wintered in New Mexico. "I need to write to him today," Eli said. "And I need to ride to the county sheriff before the end of the week." "File a report," she said. "Intimidation on private property is a charge," he said. "If I have it on record, Dunmore's people can't claim they were invited." She thought for a moment. "There's something else," she said. He looked at her. "Dunmore lost the legal route because the original deed predates the county ordinance," she said slowly. "But there's another angle he hasn't tried. The water deed is attached to the land, but it specifies use. If he can establish that the Circle K isn't actively using the full water access, that part of it has been dormant, he might be able to claim partial abandonment." Eli was very still. "How do you know about abandonment doctrine?" "I've been reading," she said. "The county library has a land law digest from 1878. I borrowed it last week." He stared at her. "You borrowed a land law digest," he said. "I was concerned he'd try another angle," she said. "I like to be prepared." He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that she could not fully parse because it was several things at once: astonishment, admiration, and something else, something quieter and more personal underneath. "Is he using the Eastern Creek access?" she said. "Actually using it consistently in a way that's documented?" "The eastern section runs through the lower pasture," Eli said. "The cattle water there daily. But whether that's documented..." It should be, she said. In the livestock logs. If there's a daily record of the herd rotating through the lower pasture that establishes continuous active use. He pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked like a man who had just had the architecture of a problem rearranged by someone who was supposed to be making breakfast. The livestock logs go back 4 years, he said. Every daily rotation is recorded. Good, she said. Then document it formally. Have Calloway sign a statement of continuous use and file it with the water registry. It preempts the abandonment argument before Dunmore makes it. He was quiet for a moment. Martha, he said. Yes. You came to this ranch 6 weeks ago to cook biscuits. I came to this ranch, she said, to run a kitchen. The kitchen is part of a ranch that is being threatened. That makes it my concern. He looked at her, long enough that she felt it. You're remarkable, he said. She picked up the supply list. The livestock log, she said. Today if possible, before those men report back to whoever sent them. He stood. He was almost out the door when he stopped. Martha. Yes, he turned. He looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was the one he wore when he had decided to say something he had been carrying for a while. I'd like to call on you properly, he said, if that's agreeable. She looked at him. She held the supply list in both hands, and she looked at this man who had walked into a loud, careless room 3 months ago and asked who made the biscuits and had been asking her things ever since real things. Things that required real answers, and had listened to every answer she gave him with the full weight of his attention. It's agreeable, she said. He touched the brim of his hat. He went. She stood in the cookhouse, and the morning light came through the east window and landed on the clay crock on the shelf, and she let herself feel it, all of it, the full complicated warmth of it, for exactly 1 minute. Then she picked up the pen and went back to the supply list. Spring came early that year, which was a mercy. The sheriff filed the intimidation report in February. Calloway signed the formal use statement, and it was filed with the water registry in the first week of March. Dunmore's next legal move, and there was one, a challenge through a different county office, failed within 10 days because the documentation was already in place. Ferris, the lawyer from the county seat, handled it and sent Eli a brief note afterward that said, "Whoever your source is on the legal strategy, hire them properly." Eli showed her the note. She read it. She handed it back. She did not say anything because she did not need to. What she felt was not pride exactly. It was more like recognition, the feeling of having been seen not just as a person, but as a capable one, as someone whose thinking mattered, whose knowledge had weight. She had felt it once before on the first morning when a man had asked who made the biscuits, as if the answer genuinely mattered to him. It had mattered. Everything that followed had come from that. By April, the intimidation visits had stopped. The Circle K had not lost an acre. Gable's way station had also survived. Ferris's original deed argument had held, and with Clara Voss running the kitchen, it was by all accounts doing better than it had in years, a fact that Martha received with the particular complicated feeling of a person whose work has outlasted their presence. She received a note from Hector in March. He said Clara was good and the biscuits were decent, but not the same, and he had been promoted to front room manager, which meant he now told other people to clear the tables instead of clearing them himself, and he was very serious about the responsibility. The note made her smile for most of a morning. She wrote back. She told him she was proud of him, and she meant it in the thorough, uncomplicated way that was new to her, or not new exactly, but newly permitted. The calling on, as Eli had named it with characteristic plainness, was a thing that happened the way he did most things consistently, without drama, with complete sincerity. He came to the cookhouse on Sunday evenings after supper was cleared. Sometimes they sat at the kitchen table. Sometimes, when the weather allowed, they sat outside on the bench she had put up against the south wall of the cabin, and the evenings were long, and the stars over the territory were extravagant, and they talked, or they were quiet, and both were good. He asked her once what she wanted, not what she needed. She had been asked what she needed plenty of times, mostly by people who wanted to know the minimum required to keep her functional. He asked what she wanted. He framed it that way deliberately, she understood, because the distinction mattered, and he was the kind of man who understood which distinctions mattered. She told him the kitchen. A real kitchen of her own, not borrowed, not contingent. The sourdough going forward the way it had gone forward for 30 years, handed down and kept alive. Work that was honest and recognized as such. And she paused here because this part was newer, less rehearsed people. People who knew her name and meant it when they said it. He listened to all of it. Then he said, "Is there room in that for someone who also plans to be here a long time?" She looked at him in the evening light. "I think you're already in it," she said. He reached over and took her hand, which was the first time he had done that. And it was a simple thing, the kind of thing that would look from outside like nothing in particular. Two people sitting on a bench in the early spring evening and felt from inside like the completion of something that had been building since a man in a crowded room had raised his voice and asked a question and genuinely waited for the answer. She did not pull her hand back. The summer was the best summer she could remember. The crew at the Circle K ate well and knew it and said so, which was a small thing that accumulated into something larger over weeks and months. Russell, the old hand with the carved from objecting material face, appointed himself unofficial judge of every new dish she made and delivered his verdicts with the gravity of a circuit court judge. He was nearly always positive and entirely without flattery, which she respected. She started teaching because she could, and because there was a young hand named Tobias who expressed interest in cooking and whom she recognized immediately as someone with instinct the same way her mother had recognized it in her, the quality of attention, the willingness to be taught. She showed him the biscuit timing. She showed him the sourdough feeding. She told him about the window of 2 minutes between perfect and overdone and how you read it by smell. He burned the first batch. He got the second one right. She told him what her mother had told her. The bread knows when you're in a hurry. It knows when you don't care. You can't rush it and you can't fake it. He wrote it down in a small notebook, which she had not expected and which affected her more than she showed. One evening in late June, she and Eli were sitting on the bench when he said without preface, in the direct way he had, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know there is no required answer, and I mean that." She looked at him. "Ask it." He asked it. She had known it was coming, not in a way she had counted down toward, but in the way you know the shape of something familiar when you see it, even if you've never seen this particular version before. She was quiet for a moment. Not because she was uncertain. She was certain with a steadiness that surprised her with its depth because certainty of this kind had not been available to her before, and she had not known what it felt like. It felt like the dough under her hands when it was ready. Something that had been working and developing and building for exactly the right amount of time, and you knew by the feel of it that it was done. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. She said, "I've known the answer for a while. I was waiting until I was sure that the yes was entirely mine and not borrowed from circumstance." "And it is," he said. "It is," she said. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out a ring, simple, plain silver, not elaborate, exactly what she would have chosen if she had been choosing, which told her that he had been paying attention in the way he always paid attention to the real thing, not the performed version. She held out her hand. He put it on. They sat on the bench in the June evening, and the territory spread out around them, and the stars were coming out one by one, and neither of them felt the need to fill the moment with more words than it already had. After a while she said, "The biscuits tomorrow morning are going to be exceptional." He looked at her. "I always make my best biscuits when something is right," she said. He laughed. A real laugh, the kind she had been collecting evidence of for months, and which still felt like a minor miracle each time it appeared. She laughed too. The wedding was in September, in the early morning. Her choice because early mornings were hers, and she was keeping them with the Circle K crew as witnesses. And Hector, who had ridden out from town and stood in the front row with his hat pressed against his chest, and an expression of total undisguised sentimentality that he did not even try to manage. Clara Voss came too, and Russell stood with his carved face, and for once looked like something in it had softened. Ferris came down from the county seat and could not explain exactly why he had, since he was not a man given to sentiment. But he stood in the back and ate 3 biscuits at the reception and told Eli that he hoped he understood what he had. Eli said he did. The years after that were years. That was the only way Martha knew how to say it, because the word years was doing a great deal of work. In a short space, it contained the full complicated texture of a life lived properly, which was different from a life lived quietly, and different again from a life that merely survived. The cookhouse became hers entirely formalized in writing by Calloway, when he transferred the eastern operations to Eli, which meant it was her husband's ranch and her kitchen, and the distinction between those two things was clear to everyone involved, because Eli had made it clear from the beginning and she held him to it. They had children. 2 of them, a girl first, then a boy, and the children grew up in a house where bread was a daily act of intention, and both parents understood the value of paying attention to things that other people overlooked. The girl, from the time she could reach the counter, wanted to be in the kitchen. Martha taught her. She started with the feeding of the starter. "It's just flour and water," the girl said once, looking at the crock with 7-year-old skepticism. "It's just flour and water," Martha agreed. "But you have to mean it." Her daughter looked up at her with wide, serious eyes and said, "I mean it." And Martha thought, yes. You do. You always have. That was never the question. The crock passed to another set of small hands, and the morning light moved across it the same way it always had, and the years were years, and they were good. One evening in the late fall, when the children were older and the ranch was quiet, and she and Eli had the kitchen to themselves, he sat at the table with his coffee while she made the evening bread, and she looked over at him, and he was watching her the way he had watched her from the first morning, with that full, unhurried attention that had never been a small thing, and that she had never stopped knowing was not a small thing. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Eli." He smiled. "I was thinking about the day I walked into Gable's." She kept her hands in the dough. And I was thinking that I almost didn't stop," he said. "I'd been up since 4. I was thinking about the work ahead. I almost kept writing." She looked at him. "But you stopped," she said. "I stopped," he said. She held his gaze across the kitchen. "Why?" she said, though she had never asked this before. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "Something smelled right," he said. "From the road through the door. I thought whoever's cooking in there is doing it like it matters." She was quiet for a moment. "It mattered," she said. "It always mattered. Nobody was paying attention." "I was paying attention," he said. "Yes," she said. "You were." She turned back to the dough. She heard him push back the chair. She heard his boots cross the floor. And then his hands were on her shoulders, warm, solid, entirely present, and he said quietly, "Close. Finest biscuits I ever ate, from the very first one." She smiled, not because she was being praised, because she was known, fully, completely, without remainder. By him, by herself, by the life they had built from the moment someone had stopped and paid attention and refused to look away. She pressed her hands into the warm dough and felt the resistance of it push back, alive and honest, and she thought of everything it had taken to arrive here, 9 years of yes. And the one morning, she said something else, and the man who had asked her name, like it was worth knowing, and the courthouse at 6 in the morning, and the window facing east, and the ring on her flour-dusted hand, and the daughter who meant it when she said she meant it. She thought of her mother, whose hands had made this same motion in a different kitchen, in a different time, who had said, "You have to mean it." She had meant it. Every morning, every batch, every honest conversation in a kitchen at the end of a long day, every yes that was genuinely hers, and every no that had cost her something and been worth the cost. She had meant all of it, and that the meaning of it, the full deliberate daily choice to care about the thing in your hands and the people around you, and the life you were building from whatever you'd been given, that was not a small thing. That was everything. Real love does not begin with words. It begins the moment someone looks at the person everyone else walked past and decides that person is worth stopping for, and keeps deciding it every morning for the rest of their life. Eli Marsh had stopped. Martha Doyle had let herself be found, and from that one moment in a loud and careless room, everything that mattered had been built.